A lot of great single-player first-person shooters are great because they're more than just shooters. Titanfall has fluid movement and titans, Destiny 2 has a class and ability system, and Doom has glory kills and dragons, I guess. The thing is, I'm developing a first-person shooter of my own, and unfortunately, my game doesn't share any of these characteristics. Instead, combat entirely consists of basic movement and basic shooting. It's bland and it gets boring quickly. So, in order to save my game from what seemed like flaccid and repetitive gameplay, I've spent the last while making combat as satisfying, layered, and addictive as possible. Welcome to Devlog 16. The combat in my game has always been a little bit mid. I think I've always pretended that the combat was super satisfying and fun just because the graphics of the game were nice, and this is absolutely not the case. All the guns were pretty much the same, every enemy looked different but behaved the same, and half the time, even if you were standing still, the enemies couldn't hit you. This combat was so broken, janky, and barely tolerable that I completely scrapped the enemies and decided to start from square one when it came to combat. Out of all the changes I've made, the guns have changed the least, but I thought it was worth it to take a look at the changes. The first thing I wanted to do was make every weapon unique, whether that meant changing the projectiles, fire rate, or even the functionality. For starters, I severely reduced the amount of weapons in the game to around 9. Each weapon is unique in their own way, from the fire rate and damage to projectiles and even the firing type. For example, there's a legendary weapon with homing bullets, a grenade launcher, a missile launcher, a pump shotgun, and so much more. Each weapon has a distinctly different feel and purpose when it comes to combat. Obviously, a lot of the effects and UI are still prototype, but all of that will be implemented soon. But this is where things get interesting. The next thing I worked on was, in my opinion, no matter how good gunplay is, it gets boring without other layers and mechanics to complement it. For years, I've always had these cool ideas for mechanics that would make the game super fun, such as a grapple, a shield, area effects, etc. Unfortunately, they never really fit as weapons, and so I decided to turn these mechanics into abilities the player can use. This is where I encountered a bit of a problem. Let's say an ability I want to add is a grenade. To do this, I assign grenades to the G key, so I can trigger a grenade throw every time I press that button. Now let's say I want the player to have 4 abilities when they enter a level. All of a sudden, this system becomes unmanageable and confusing, with 4 different keys for 4 different abilities on top of the base controls. So I decided to switch to an ability wheel, similar to something you see in a game like Zelda. When you press tab, the game slows down and an ability wheel appears, allowing you to select an ability. I spent a ton of time trying to make this system intuitive and easy to use, since I want the player to be able to switch between abilities while in the middle of combat. Once you select an ability with the wheel, every time you press the key assigned to it, that ability will be used. Also, for the icons, I used a free RPG icon pack, and I'm surprised this asset is free because the icons are great. Although I might make my own in the future since some of the icons don't really make sense, I actually really love how they look. The abilities themselves range from shields to a grapple to a magnet and at least 10 others. Unfortunately, I've only been able to make the dash, the magnet, and the grenade functional, but the rest will follow very quickly. The last thing to add was a stamina system. Although I haven't made the HUD visual for this, the system itself is implemented. Your stamina also regenerates when you kill enemies around you. Now, technically speaking, this doesn't make sense since you run out of stamina when you're tired, and if you're tired, killing enemies shouldn't make you not tired, but then why is it called a stamina system? So with abilities implemented, I've realized that for the first time, I have to think when playing the game, since not only am I actively using the guns to shoot down enemies, but I've also got to think about the abilities I have and which will help me the most. Just like the weapons, the abilities are still very much prototype, and only 3 of them are functional, but despite this, I've actually had so much fun chaining combos. These combos have also given me so many ideas for future combat systems and mechanics I want to implement, but all of that is for another time. Now, just like I love the direction we're headed in for combat, I also love Brilliant, today's sponsor. Brilliant is a digital platform filled to the brim with lessons in math, programming, AI, and data analysis. One of my favorite things about this platform is the fact that it develops a daily learning habit by teaching you a little bit every day. Brilliant is especially great at teaching science, with courses covering everything from circuits to black holes. I personally love physics and by extension engineering, and it's great to see how these courses help people think like engineers with their interactive lessons. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, you can visit brilliant.org/the Unity Guy, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. Using these, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Now, coming back to the video, you might be thinking that I haven't really done much in the last 2 months. I mean, all we've really covered is the new weapons and the ability system, and even those features are missing a ton of polish and UI. Well, that's because I've actually spent most of my time working on something I'm super excited to show you guys. As I've begun to flesh out the story, I've started to implement mechanics that are directly connected to the narrative of the game. Obviously, I'm not going to explain what you're looking at, but you can think of this as something similar to Painkiller's Demon Mode. The player can choose to enter this mode when their stamina bar is full, and even though it uses up all of the player's stamina, it allows them to become completely overpowered for a short amount of time. In Painkiller, when you enter Demon Mode, the colors and post-processing completely change, emphasizing the change of state. Although I've added some effects to my version of this system, the change in state still isn't very clear and is going to be something I work on in the future. Once you enter this state, things start to get interesting. For starters, you're equipped with an entirely new inventory of weapons, each of which can be bought from the in-game store. Because of this rage mode, I was able to implement mechanics and weapons I originally thought were too abstract for the game. For example, there are weapons that shoot lasers and orbs, and even though these weapons are entirely in their prototyping stage, I can't understate how satisfying they are. This rage mode lasts for a short amount of time and uses up all of the player's stamina, but it makes up for it by making the player super strong. Now, while you watch this video, you probably noticed that almost everything is in its prototyping stage, with almost no polish, models, or UI. Well, after the last video, a lot of you mentioned that I should focus less on graphics and more on features, gameplay, and just making sure the game is fun, and you guys were completely right. Even though everything I've made is in an early prototyping stage, I can't explain how much fun I'm having shooting cubes in an empty room. For a long time, combat in this game has been tolerable, but for the first time in a while, it's actually fun. This change is really reassuring and just tells me that I'm going in the right direction when it comes to combat. But with that said, thank you for sticking around and I'll see you in the next one.